Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and namaste. Welcome to the very first episode of the podcast series Igniting Joy. This is where we'll be speaking with individuals who are making a difference around them in their communities and helping us all get one step closer to a better world. This being the first episode in this series, I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about how I got here before I introduce my guest today. Like so many out there, I've devoted a lot of time pursuing material success, with mixed results, I might add. And then in recent times, I started to feel I needed to do something more. We all have been inundated by waves of negativity and intolerance in recent times, often leaving us with a sense of hopelessness and even despair. I just want to add my voice to the mission of injecting a tiny bit of positivity in our public discourse, in the hope that it would lead to a better and a wider understanding and appreciation of the vast variety of human experiences that make up our world community. Ambitious, perhaps, but a worthy pursuit nevertheless. I have no illusions that this podcast series will change the world. But if I can impact one element, one person, if I can move that one tiny little brick in the wall of negativity that keeps us from enjoying and experiencing joy, then it shall be worth it. So, folks, this podcast series is going to be about a series of conversations with a wide range of individuals: celebrities, tech gurus, philosophers, artists of every kind, in fact, people from all walks of life. And we're going to talk about all those things that impact us together. Today, I'm at the campus of SAP's Academy for Engineering in San Ramon, California. For those of you who may be wondering, where is San Ramon, California? It's in the San Francisco Bay Area. And for those of you who are not familiar with SAP, it's one of the largest software companies in the world, and major corporations around the globe consume one or more services from SAP to run their businesses. It's big stuff. Let's just leave it at that. My association with SAP is long and deep. I've spent many years in the SAP ecosystem working for SAP and for others in this ecosystem. So it has a special place for me in my work life, if you will. So it just seemed right that I should embark on this journey from right here. And it makes it extra special today because my guest today is an executive of SAP, very well respected, and one who has so graciously given us time today. Our guest today has never been shy about sharing his personal story, has never been shy about letting us know how he came to the realization of what his mission in life was, what purpose he was meant to serve. And he has always been out there trying to encourage others to find that as well. Every word he speaks, every message he writes, every book he authors, and every individual he counsels, he makes a big impact beyond those individuals. And I'd like to think he gets some joy, some fulfillment from this because he is able to basically enable others to be in a position to experience joy themselves. Folks, my guest today is none other than Mr. V.R. Ferose, who is here with us. He is a role model and certainly an ambassador of joy. Ferose, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Puneet. Such a pleasure to be part of this incredible journey that you're venturing into.
Thank you. Folks, Ferose is the head of the SAP Academy for Engineering. And he formerly headed the Globalization Services Unit and was responsible for enabling the global adoption of SAP products worldwide. He served as the managing director of SAP Labs India. And in 2012, Ferose founded the India Inclusion Summit. In 2014, he was featured in India's top 40 under 40 by the Economic Times. He also co-authored with Sudha Menon a bestseller book on people with disabilities called Gifted. In subsequent years, he has built upon this foundational work, serving people with disabilities through his thought leadership, his work with all sorts of agencies around the world, and authoring more thought provoking literature in this sphere. His work has been recognized, felicitated, and honored by corporations, government bodies, as well as former Senator Tom Harkin. We could sit here for a few hours, Feroze, and just go over your resume and talk about your distinguished career and the wonderful work you're doing. But folks out there, you can stay up to speed with what Feroze is up to at ferozevr.com. If after this podcast you really want to keep tabs on him, some people might want to. But Feroze, let's start today's conversation by talking about this wonderful place we are in. And this is my first visit here to the Academy. And I see code around me, but I also see some very evocative influences. And then we have that pie back there. So tell us where we are, what this is, and what are you seeking to achieve here?
It's very good. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Puneet. Maybe this is the idea of the SAP Academy for Engineering started in 2019. This was just before COVID happened. And one of the big challenges our current CEO gave to me was the idea of building the next generation of engineers for SAP. SAP is a product company. You briefly mentioned about it. And we are basically the product of some incredible engineering that our engineers are able to do, which creates outstanding products for our customers. And the big fundamental question he was asking is, do we have the engineers to produce the next breakthrough product? And so that's it's a very broad question that he was trying to answer. And so our question was, what is the engineer? What is the persona of an engineer that you're looking for? And, I'm talking about a few years ago, we said the persona of an engineer or a persona of a very good engineer is somebody who's T-shaped, who has depth of engineering skills and breadth of domain knowledge. And we started understanding that. Is that what a good engineer looks like? And we were greatly inspired by Stanford professor Ge Wong, who wrote this book called Artful Design. And he said the best engineers or the engineers of the future are not T-shaped, but pie-shaped. And so what does pie mean? And so we try to understand from him, what does a pie-shaped engineer look like? And he said a pie-shaped engineer is basically you have two legs and you have something on top of it. The first leg stands for discipline. The discipline is, in our case, it's engineering or computer science. The second leg is domain. In our case, this is an educational place. So this is all about learning. Mm-hmm. And the pie and the top thing is the most important thing, what he calls as the aesthetic lens, which is nothing but your context or your philosophy or moral being. And the context is the most important element on which these two legs stand on. And that was an aha moment, because at the end of the day, everything is contextual. A good engineer is also contextual. And so having a point of view is very central to the idea of a good engineer. So that's what we believe. A good engineer is pie-shaped. He has deep understanding of the discipline. He has deep understanding of the domain. But more importantly, he has a very clear philosophical point of view or context of the world we live in. So that's what we believe this place will evoke or create the next engineers of the future.
So they're not just about the nuts and bolts they have to deal with, but they have to bring a lot of themselves to it.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we believe, a lot of good engineering was all about, can you write good code? But, if you write good code with bad outcomes, and if you're not grounded in good moral standing, you can create a bad world, or you can create more negative disruptions than positive disruptions. So we believe it has to be seen holistically. It's not just about good coding skills, but it's also a good, complete, well-rounded human being that we want to aspire to build.
And I think that's spot on with what we've been learning in recent times, that there are people with great abilities who lack empathy because they don't have that well-rounded nature, if you will. Yeah. And if you're molding that here, it's fantastic. But let's talk about some other things now, because We can be talking about this. We're not going to talk about SAP and SAP's Academy anymore. We're going to talk about the wonderful work you've been doing. And I see you brought out a copy of this book, which you were very kind enough to autograph for me a couple of months back. It's called The Invisible Majority, and you co-authored this with C.K. Meena. And it has a foreword by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Tell us and tell our listeners why they should read this book, and how did this come about?
Yeah, I mean, I let me be very clear about the fact that I had no connection with disability until my son was diagnosed with one. So my son, who's now 13 years old, was diagnosed with autism in the year 2010. Until then, I had no understanding of what autism was. Like most of us, the first thing that I did was to go to Dr. Google, which is what is autism, right? That's how basic my understanding or lack of it was. But it was also a very difficult moment for me because I think if you look back, almost for all parents, you are a parent yourself, you would realize that the hardest point is to see your children go through pain. You can probably deal with your own pain, but your children going through pain is very hard. And so when my son was diagnosed with autism, it was a very difficult moment. They say you go through your 5 stages of grief, right? Starting with denial to anger to finally you get to a point of acceptance. So I went through my 5 stages of grief, and I was depressed for some time. Like, why did this happen to me? But I think you have to go through those 5 stages before you get to the acceptance stage. And there's a beautiful saying that you should accept what you can't change, but change what you can't accept. And so, while it took me some time, but as soon as I reached the point of acceptance, I realized things got better. It wasn't all dark and gloomy and depressing as I had imagined in my face, but it was all about seeing what is it, number one, I can do to support my child. And then the next big thing was, can I contribute not just to my son, but also to the larger community of people with disabilities? So, long story short, the last 10 years or more, since 2010, really my mission has been not just to take care of my son, but also to bring a larger difference to the community of people with disabilities, which I was surprised to realize is actually the most marginalized community in the world. 15% of the world's population, I'm talking about more than 1 billion people, are people with disabilities, and they are the largest minority in the
More
world.
than 1 billion.
Yeah, more than 1 billion.
Wow.
Yeah. So in some ways, this book is what I've learned in the last 10 years, and I thought I should share it with the larger community of people.
Thank you. Obviously, it's tied to with your personal journey. And today we talk about the books that you've written and you're co-authoring, and the other different movements that you are a part of to help this community
Yeah.
of over 1 billion people. But it could not have been easy, and don't want to gloss over the fact that, and if you're comfortable,
Sure.
because there are folks out there who possibly are in the same shoes that you were at one time,
Yeah.
and for them there doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Could you share a little bit about how you got started down this path?
Yeah. No, very good question, Puneet. And let me maybe share some numbers just
Sure.
to
Yes.
just to put some context
Yes.
to what I'm trying to tell. And let me tell you that this continues to be an incredibly difficult journey. Okay. My son today is 13 years old. He has no speech, so he can't speak. So communication is incredibly hard. He has a severe form of Crohn's disease, which is a non-autoimmune disease. So there are multiple challenges that you have to deal with day in and day out. But let's look at the community at a larger context. We are talking about 1 billion people around the world. The data is staggering, and it's not consistent. But if you look at US versus India or other parts of the world, obviously the numbers vary. But if you just look, and India, the numbers was like 95% of the people who are disabled have no meaningful source of employment. 95%.
Wow.
right? And the people who do have some source of employment are just kind of doing at the bare minimum. They are not maximizing their potential. It is really doing the bare minimum to survive. So, no employment. Financially, they are in a very difficult situation. Parents who have children who are disabled, it's the numbers are staggering. More than 70 to close to 80% of people who have children with disabilities end up with broken marriages. They end up getting divorced because it's an incredible struggle for couples to handle children who are challenged. So there are massive number of issues that people with disabilities face, but the fundamental problem that people face is acceptance, is to change the mindset that having a disability is not a taboo. There's nothing wrong with it. Sometimes it could be a stroke of luck. You could have met with an accident. Sometimes you could have just been born and with a disability or a disabling condition. So I think the root cause of all of this is a mindset where you look down on people with disabilities. And unless we change that, and a lot of my work in the last decade has been to change people's mindset that it's okay to be disabled. And by the way, if you live long enough, all of us are going to be disabled at some point or the other. So that's been really my mission.
The book makes it very clear, because
Yeah.
I think it almost starts with that.
Yeah. And the other thing is sometimes we don't realize once you become old, you will have a disabling condition,
Yes.
right? So there is, I think, a need to understand people with disabilities much deeper, because it's going to affect all of us.
And it's not just about them and their current condition, right?
Yeah.
It is everything around them as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at in my family, my son is disabled, but it's affected all of us. My wife, my in-laws who live with me, my parents, my other siblings. So a person with disability affects a whole family. So it's never the 15% or the billion we should be talking about. It's actually at least four other people who gets directly affected by having a person with disability. So we are technically speaking about 60% of the world's population
Yes.
being affected because of people with disabilities.
That is staggering.
That is staggering.
Wow. That is really staggering. More than half the
World's
world's population.
Yeah.
I'm trying to still piece that together in my head.
Yeah.
But, once you started down this path, and, you've shared this in other places, I know.
Sure.
Would you like to share about how you made this the purpose of your life,
Yeah.
to work with others? Because I know there was some, you tell the story much better than I can. So, and we've talked about it, so I know. But for our listeners, if you can
Yeah.
please share how you realize this is your mission.
Yeah. I think I would say there are two defining moments. There are many, but there are two that really put me into this path of, trying to make a meaningful difference to people with disabilities. The first one was when, after my son's diagnosis, I was speaking to a lot of parents, because the best person to know what to do is to talk to other parents who are in similar conditions as I am. And almost all of them said only one thing, that their biggest concern was what to do with their children after they're gone. That's kind of the number one thing that every parent with a disabled child, literally goes to sleep with and wakes up with this simple thought: what happens to my child after I'm gone? Now, while everybody was telling me this, I didn't realize it, honestly, Puneet, what it meant. I was still kind of trying to figure out, what does this really mean? Until one father told me this. He said, Ferose, my wish is to live one day more than my child. Which I think is the most painful thing I've ever heard, because no parent will ever wish for that. And for this person to actually wish for it and tell me about it really made me understand how deep the issue is. And that really broke my heart. And that's when I started thinking, I really dug deeper into it. Okay, why are you saying this? And he said, Feroz, the reason is because my child is not independent. He's dependent on me for every day-to-day activities, not just financial stability, but everything around it. And so one of the root causes of that, my realization, was what I shared before, that 95% of people with disabilities have no meaningful employment. And I thought that is one area where maybe I can make a difference. And I happened to meet There's an incredible Danish entrepreneur who had the same problem and started a tech company in Denmark called Specialistern, which means the specialist. And he said that, I'm going to hire people on the autism spectrum, and I want to do it not as charity, but to prove that there is a business benefit of doing that. And his key insight was people on the autism spectrum have certain skills which are better than the so-called neurotypical people, which is attention to detail, which is the ability to do repeated tasks, and so on. That's how he started hiring people on the autism spectrum for doing software testing. I was so inspired by what he did. I actually flew to Denmark, looked at what he did, and I was just amazed that here was an office with 100 people, of which 80 of them were people on the autism spectrum.
Wow.
20 of them were basically managing this, remaining 80 people. But you give them a task, they will do it to perfection. They need some accommodations and some help. But if you create those accommodations, you can get outcomes that are far better than others. And so I was so inspired by that I actually came back to Bangalore. And at that time, I was the MD of SAP Labs. And I said, you know what, we're going to try this out in India. So we hired the first three people. By the way, they didn't have any college degrees. They only knew how to read and write and browse the internet. So we basically trained them from ground up. They'd never done a job, never gone to an office. They're basically sitting at home playing video games. We got them in, and within a span of a year, we were able to prove that their outcome was as good, if not better, than some of my best engineers. So the thing that mattered was somebody had to provide them those opportunities. Somebody had to believe that they have capabilities. That's all we had to do, right?
And they were so productive.
They were so productive. And this was not charity. As I said, this is not charity. Sure. This is to show that they can provide business benefits. And what happened after that was, Puneet, it's nothing but a series of coincidences. As they say, the rest is history. We have now what SAP made a massive announcement about hiring 1% of its global workforce with people on the autism spectrum. It's by far the most landmark announcement ever made by a corporate. This was in 2013. 2016, it became a Harvard case study. In 2016, Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations asked other corporates.
Secretary General
Ban Ki-moon. I was there. He said every other corporate should do what SAP has, kind of shown can be done. Today, we have more than 100 companies, mostly in the technology world, who have all committed to hiring people on the autism spectrum.
So basically, autism at work, pioneered by you at SAP, is the model is being replicated
across more than 100 companies already.
Wow.
Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase, Goldman Sachs, IBM, HP, across the world. Today, neurodiverse hiring is a norm. It wasn't when I started it way back in 2011, and SAP announced it in 2013. So you see, good things can happen.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is what I find so inspiring, that, you took a very difficult personal situation and turned it into an opportunity for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people because of the work you started doing. And it just takes one little spark to ignite that, right?
It's a very interesting thought what you're saying, because initially I wasn't very comfortable telling people that it is very personal. But what I've realized, Puneet, is that all good things are personal. Right? I mean, it has to have moved you deeply inside for you to have created a larger outer impact. Outer impact always starts with something deep inside.
I think that is so right. But I think we got a little serious here. Let's change tracks and find something else. All my guests are required to pick a song, and you have picked a song. We're going to play that now.
Yeah.
So we're going to play that for a bit, and then we'll talk.
Yeah.
Folks, before we play the song, I just want you to know we are speaking with technologist, author, ambassador of joy, certainly a role model for me. We are Ferose from SAP. And now we're going to listen to a song he's picked out. नदी का किनारा ये चंचल हवा ये रातें ये मौसम नदी का किनारा ये चंचल हवा कहा दो दिलों ने कि मिलकर कभी हम न होंगे जुदा ये रातें ये मौसम नदी का किनारा ये चंचल हवा.
It's such a beautiful number, right? I mean, my wife sings it so beautifully that I've just. The good thing about the song is you can listen to it. There's actually no music.
Pause. Let's do this one more time.
Yeah.
Okay, so the song is over.
Yeah.
It'll be inserted.
Yeah.
And so let me just introduce the
Yeah.
song. Folks, that was a classic picked out by our guest Ferose today, sung by the versatile genius Kishore Kumar and Asha Bhosle ji. This song, Ye Raatein, Ye Mausam, Nadi Ka Kinara, Ye Chanchal Hawa. It's from an old classic Hindi film called Dilli Ka Thug. So, and if you're just tuning in, we are speaking with our guest, V.R. Ferose, who has pioneered the inclusion movement within corporations and across continents. Ferose, why did you pick this song?
My wife is an outstanding singer. And this is one of the songs that I absolutely love her singing because, you could just listen to the song without any music. It's very minimal music, if you see. And so I just love the fact, every time she's singing, she plays the piano, and she was my classmate in college, and she was part of the music group.
Oh, wait a minute. There's a story here. Folks, we're going to find out a little bit about this romance.
We went to college together, and she was part of the music club, and she sang songs very beautifully.
So she was one of the cool kids.
Yeah, she was. I was a boring one.
Yeah, you were the nerd, and she was the cool kid, right?
I wasn't the nerd. I was the boring guy. I was too serious sometimes. She was fun. She was fun. Yeah. So we met in college. Fell in love. We had a lot of challenge getting married because we come from different religious backgrounds. I'm a Muslim, she's a Hindu, and they say Hindu-Muslim weddings are perfect recipe for disaster in India. but we got married, and we're still very happily married, and I'm very grateful. Somebody beautifully said, all you need for a good life is a partner and purpose. That's it. And I've been very blessed that I found my partner, Dipali, and my life through my son gave my purpose too.
And I'm certain, I mean, I don't know the details obviously, but I'm certain that you realizing your purpose is only possible because of the excellent partner that you have.
By far,
right?
By far. It's sometimes interesting, Puneet, that how much of our life depends on that one single choice we make. And many of us make those choices not being aware of what it means, right? But that one choice can literally decide whether you're going to be happy and joyous for the rest of your life or otherwise. So I will tell to every listener, it's an important decision you make. I was just lucky.
Well, we might just end up into a topic about marriage counseling and family therapy, so we will stay out of that.
Yeah.
That's a tricky area.
Yeah.
But seriously, I think that's a beautiful song, and I'm glad we got a little look into your into another side of your personal, personal side of things.
Sure.
And it's wonderful. So let's talk about one more book.
Yeah.
Because when we met and you gave me this book, you brought along a gift for me.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't know if you remember this, but we probably do, because you wrote in there for me, don't stop being gritty, because the book is called Grit, the Vishwas story.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, it's made a personal impact on me, and I've gone over it multiple times, and it sits in a very prominent place in my home. And anybody who comes, I tell them, it's an easy read. Just go through it. And they're like, what is the deal with you? We didn't come here to read a book. I said, no, it's not a book. It's a comic book.
Yeah.
Read it.
Yeah.
Beautifully illustrated. And the narrative is just, it just grabs you in a way that very few things have. Or maybe it's just maybe sometimes the right time in life when you appreciate certain things.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the Vishwas story,
Yeah.
how that book came about.
Yeah. So, one of the things that we realize, and it has a lot of connection to what I'm trying to do at my day job at SAP, we are looking at what is the single most important predictor of success. I've said this often that one of the most universal human desires is to be successful. Everybody wants to be successful, whatever that success means for that individual. And what we realized is that the single most important indicator of success in the long run is not talent, is not your educational background, is not your family background, is not your financial means, it's not the university which you went to, but really it's all about grit. And Angela Duckworth wrote this book called Grit, and I was greatly inspired by that. Now, what is grit? Grit is nothing but a combination of passion and perseverance. Passion is doing something that you absolutely love, and perseverance, which is the most important element, is to keep doing it even when you fail many times. The ability to bounce back every time you fail, and that is the single most important predictor of success.
So that's what you were saying to me when you said don't stop being gritty.
Yeah.
Was like keep persevering,
Yeah.
even though you might encounter failure many times.
And so if you look at any successful person, most of us just see the tip of the success, but they never look at all the struggles they've gone through. And so the idea of writing the Grit series is basically threefold. The first is I want to tell the stories of unsung heroes. Most of the books are written about extremely successful people, but I said, can I talk about unsung heroes, people who've achieved a lot of success, but not too many people know about it. Most of them have gone through a severe crisis in their life. It could be a disabling condition. It could be from a very poor background, and so on. And the third thing, what I wanted to do is to write it in a format that is easily accessible. I have no illusions that most people don't read. If you look at the numbers, it's staggering. Less than 1% of the people actually read books regularly. They say 50% of people in the US have not read a single book after they graduated, not read a single book. So I know that reading is not the most universal thing that people do. And so my idea was, can I tell that in a format which is easy for people to consume? And I found that graphic novels are very easily accessible. Even a non-reader would want to read it. So, I try to bring the story of grit of an unsung hero in a graphic format, and that's what the Grit series is about. We wrote the first one, found great success, which was called The Major Story. This is the second one called The Vishwas Story, and we'll have a third one, which is, it takes almost 3 years to write one book. So there will be a third one too.
So the first two I know were about individuals, the main protagonists, are people who have disabilities.
Yeah.
Either, I won't give away, I won't do a spoiler thing here. I think people should read these books. But how that came about and what their struggles were and how they conquered,
Yeah.
And they went past those disabilities and they made a mark for themselves and for others. And that's what these stories are about. They're tremendously inspiring. So that is also a focus of the Grit series. So these unsung heroes
Yeah.
are typically individuals with some disability.
Yeah. So this is something that Nagesh Kukunor, who's a very famous Indian director, told me once. He said, "Don't focus on the cause; always focus on the story." The fact that these people are disabled is incidental. The most important element is that they have a fascinating story of journey which is has multiple ups but way more downs, and they've always come back after a struggle. And I think that's a universal story. We all go through those, right? I go through my low points. I'm sure you go through your low points, but really the crux of it is how have you dealt with it? How have you bounced back?
Yeah, and I think everyone likes the story of the bounce back, as we like to say, the comeback kid, if you will, in some ways. Yeah. So, and the third one, can you tell us a little bit about it, or it's too early?
No, I think the one thing that's pretty clear. I mean, it takes me a lot of time to identify a protagonist. That takes a lot of time. But it's pretty clear that the third one is going to be a woman, because we want to have all diversity included. And our focus will be more on intellectual disability. If you see, the first two are based on people who have physical disabilities. Today, I see mental health and intellectual disabilities is a big part of
It's
the
huge.
challenge we face. So we want to put a spotlight on that. So that's
Absolutely.
what we I can share right now.
Okay, no, that's great. So, folks, the Grit series, there's the first book was called The Major Story. The second one's called The Vishwas Story. For those of you who don't not familiar with Indian words and languages, the word Vishwas also means belief.
Yeah.
So that's going to be interesting. It's all in English, by the way. So I think people should be able to enjoy this. And I certainly like the graphic format
Thank
because
you.
that's how I've gotten a few of the guests in my house to read it. I'm like, before we have dinner, can you take a look at this? They're like, are you nuts? I'm like, no, 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 just go through it. And they're like, wow, I didn't know this. I said, not, neither did I.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, folks. It's fantastic. So Firoz, I mean, we could sit here and we could be talking about so many things. And if you are kind enough to give us time again,
Sure.
we'd like you to come back again.
Sure.
But there's one question that's sort of a burning question. I want to get that out there. And I think it will be very beneficial to all of us. If you could go back in time and give advice to the 18-year-old Feroz, what would you say to him?
Good question.
About life, about
Yeah.
purpose, about,
Yeah.
hey, heck, even about finding a partner. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I think this is a reflection exercise that everybody should do. My take is maybe two insights that I would like everybody to take away. So one of my signature quotes was, "With passion and compassion, you can change the world." Okay, and I use that everywhere in all my speeches, and for the last 10 years. And then I realized how naive I was and how wrong I was. And I've changed it now to saying, with passion and compassion, you can change yourself. Because a lot of times people think that you can change the world, but you can't. I mean, it's too complex. What you can change is yourself, right? And you changing is one small drop in changing the world, right? So that's the first thing I want to say. Don't focus too much on externalizing it. Focus on yourself. And once you change yourself, the rest will happen. So that's one thing that I would like to share is my biggest learning. The second important learning is, when I was young, I was too idealist, and I thought that good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, and the world is fundamentally fair. Completely wrong, Puneet. The world is unfair.
Tell me about it.
Good things happen to bad people, and sometimes bad things happen to good people. But that's why the world is so incredibly interesting. It is interesting because it's unpredictable. If everything was predictable, if good things only happen to good people, then life would be so much more boring. And once you realize that, I think there is a lot of people can achieve what I call as joy, which is what your podcast is all about. Because a lot of unhappiness comes from the fundamental belief, oh, I did all the right things, but why did this not work for me? Or I didn't get the job that I wanted. The reality of life is, the fastest guy doesn't always win the race. The smartest guy doesn't always get the promotion he or she thinks he deserves. The wisest man doesn't become the king, right? The incredibly smart guy doesn't necessarily become the richest guy. And that's just the truth of life. So once you accept that, I think you'll achieve joy.
So acceptance is part of it,
Absolutely.
along with the understanding.
And the world is extremely complex, extremely complex. It's multidimensional, right? And a lot of us are sometimes seeing the world from a single dimension and your point of view. But if you look from a very complex point of view, it's very hard to decide, why should this have happened to me and that not happen
We
to
do
me.
that all the time.
We do that all the
Yeah.
time.
No, that's very insightful, Firoz. And I think I could have used that advice at 18 too. but since you mentioned about the podcast being about joy, there is some research, folks, from a few years ago that came out of the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. And their findings, well, if I was to just paraphrase it in English, because it's a complex paper, it basically says the joy of giving lasts longer than the joy of getting. And it further concludes that one finds the experience relatively pleasurable the more we do it. So, what that means is that if we just engage in that, we would be not only joyous ourselves, but obviously we are doing it while bringing joy to others. And it's very nicely summarized by the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa. And thank you for reminding me about that, Feroz, in a conversation we had a while back. And I went back and I watched the documentary again. Folks, it's called Mission Joy, Finding Happiness in Troubled Times. It's essentially interaction between the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu from South Africa and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And they meet in Dharamshala in India, and it's actually quite entertaining to watch. But the Archbishop summarizes it in a puts it very succinctly in one line when he says, "Joy is the reward of seeking to give joy to others," and that I think is validated by the study I was talking about earlier. And like yourself, Feroz, because I think anybody could have been unsettled, and you told us some statistics about the bad outcomes of when people are faced with situations in their families, but it's been the opposite for you. Is you found a purpose where you started to help unlock the possibility of joy for others.
Yep.
And igniting that for others possibly has given you more fulfillment.
Yeah.
And has made you joyous. And I wish that for everybody. And hopefully we'll have many more conversations with other guests on this show.
Sure.
Along a similar vein. And I wanted to make that point today because hopefully that will be something that emerges in every conversation I have with the guests who come on here. But Feroz, I mean, this has been awesome. Is there any other parting thought you have for today's conversation? And I said today's because we're going to revisit and have another one. And we're going to go a little deeper into some of these topics.
Yeah, the thing that I often speak about is really finding that core purpose. And one of my realizations is that pain, purpose, and progress are correlated.
Pain, purpose, and progress, the three Ps.
The three Ps are correlated. And you look back in history, you will find that anybody who's found their purpose always found it through a difficult moment. It wasn't through, when they were the happiest, they found their purpose, whether it's the Buddha or anybody else, you name it. And pain just happens to be a universal thing. Nobody's going to escape that. So all I want to tell you is that, it's okay if you're going through a difficult time. Maybe that is where you find your core purpose. And once you start working on your purpose is when progress happens. Progress for yourself, progress for the world. So, don't get bogged down by difficult times. That's all I would say, because in that difficult time is probably the seeds of light, of grace, of love, of compassion.
Thank you, Feroz. That's just awesome. I think I need not say anything further because you've summarized it beautifully. Folks, that was Feroz, technologist, author, ambassador of joy. I think that's the only way I can summarize it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you.
And that was our conversation with VR Feroz today.
Thank you, Puneet. And I wish all the listeners a lot of joy.
Thank you.
Ruckus Avenue Radio.